All right, rock and roll. Welcome one, welcome all to the Scorched Earth Political Podcast. I am your host, John. And if you could kindly hit that like and subscribe button, it means a lot to us. Feel free to leave a comment, even the trolls, bring it all on. I try to personally respond to them in an expeditious manner. Just depends on my sleep pattern that day. And like they said in the classic movie Smokey and the Bandit, we got a long way to go. We got a short time to get there. Let's get to it. Let's burn it all to the effing ground. And obviously, the Hamas peace deal is the biggest thing in the world still. Donald Trump, like we've talked about on Monday, said the war is over. Well, it seems like the whole 2 days didn't really quite last that long, and the peace deal seems to be falling apart quicker than my Enron stock. It is a catastrophe. It wasn't a very good agreement. They didn't think it out. This is really typical of what the Trump administration is all about. They have an idea, they get to the first step, they just don't worry about the next 10, right? So Hamas actually was supposed to disarm in this agreement. Now, they are going through the streets, going after Palestinians who they say are enemy collaborators. They are shooting them. Donald Trump has a real problem with that. Like we've talked about, he says he's going to violently disarm them if he needs to. We don't have to ask the question that's on the tip of your lips, which if you could do it now, why couldn't you do it 9 months ago? But let's move on. Now, the other thing is Israel is complaining that they are not getting the dead hostages back quick enough. And I honestly think this was a ploy from the beginning. There's many hostages there, somewhere between 40 and 60, I believe is the number. I could be wrong. But they have returned 4, 6, 8. Red Cross actually took receipts for some of them today. And Israel is chomping at the bit. They want them all back. But the problem is, how do you uncover them? Like I said, and this is something nobody else is talking about. How did Hamas know where every hostage was? If they would have known where they were, they would have been vulnerable to Israel and intercepting their communications. Israel has with Mossad and Shin Bet, they have literally the most sophisticated intelligence agency in the world. They've got ears everywhere. Now, I know what you're thinking because you are part of the smartest audience in the podcast world. John, if that was happening, how come they didn't know about October 7th? I got no answer to that. You know, we know about where an Iranian general is on the third floor of an office building in Syria, but somehow we didn't know about 1,200 Hamas fighters coming over our border on October 7th. Signs and wonders. Signs and wonders. But now Israel is chomping at the bit, and I think honestly they knew they were not going to get the bodies back in a 72-hour fashion like the peace agreement said. Hamas was basically like, it's when you buy a car, just give me the paper, I'll sign it, I want to get out of here. And now Israel is talking about reigniting the war. Donald Trump on Wednesday said, yes, if they don't give back all the hostages, even though they're under hundreds of tons of concrete rubble because of all the destroyed buildings, well, then maybe I'll let them resume the war. Well, Israel's going to do what Israel wants to do. Donald Trump has no control over them. We all know that. I don't know who's the master and who's the slave in this situation, but they're both betrothed to each other because they're both war criminals. They got to stick together. They let each other do whatever they want. And Donald Trump came out and said, like we've talked about, we need to get Hamas disarmed and we need to get the hostages back. To me, this is just another Israeli ploy to continue the war because we know as soon as the war is over, Benjamin Netanyahu is going to be up on corruption charges. But Trump also said something really interesting to the reporters on Wednesday evening. He said that he is actually doing research. Try not to giggle with that one. Read a book? Donald Trump? And that Hamas is going through Gaza and cleaning out all the violent gangs. So on one day he says they need to disarm, but the other he says they're doing a good thing by getting rid of the violent gangs. How are they going to do that, Mr. President, without guns? And I wish they would disarm. I want to adamantly say that. But if you are sitting here promoting, hey, they're doing the Lord's work, getting rid of these violent gangs, which of course they probably are doing that because they consider them competition for the throne of running the new government, or, you know, where do we go with the enemy collaborators where they're shooting innocent civilians in the street? Whatever that is. Donald Trump wants it both ways. He wants them to cleanse it, but then give up the arms. I mean, how does that work? How are they going to get them to, get these violent gangs under control? Harsh words, prayers, kind of like the GOP tries to control or say, put a little safety shield on us from gun violence in America. This next story really stunned me. And I don't get stunned too often, but I'm going to give you some information I can tell you right now nobody else is talking about. And we have gun violence in America, obviously, epidemic. Mass shootings are over the top. We have record numbers of gun deaths each and every year. That's one thing that's going up, right? So in the last 2 weeks, the big ones, Michigan, Alabama, South Carolina, Mississippi, and every gun death breaks my heart, but that Mississippi one really, really hit home at just kids going to a homecoming event and then just getting slaughtered. I mean, we get so numb to the reality of what this gun violence is in America. And these were just kids starting out in life. And they went to a homecoming event. They were going to celebrate part of their year, one of the two big events basically on the high school calendar, homecoming and the prom. And 4 kids went to the morgue. They came home in body bags. Their parents had to bury them. But let's move off. These mass shootings are basically under the control of the ATF, the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. Now it's also called explosives, but for the purposes of this podcast, let's just call it the ATF, right? So they are the ones who investigate threats online, suspicious people of a suspicious nature. Let me use my language a little more fluently. Of a suspicious nature, actual threats, things like that could evoke into mass shootings, gun violence, etc., whatever you want to call it. Well, it seems like this just came to light. 80% of their current agents and special agents who deal exclusively with these gun crimes have been reassigned to, wait for it, immigration. Yeah, immigration. Because we got to make sure that immigrant working a 9-to-5 job in the back of a restaurant needs to get deported versus somebody who decides they're going to take an AK-47 and go into some public place and shoot it all up. Now, that may not shock you. What did shock me, though, is I read deeper into numerous articles, 3 actually, and they were talking about the dirty little secret in America. What is that, John? Well, the dirty little secret is they have so few agents because they were cut by Doge at the beginning of the year, kind of like the IRS and Social Security, that now, especially with the 80% that have been reassigned to other parts of government, that people, when they go into a gun store and they purchase a weapon, there's supposed to be a 10-day background check. Okay? I'm not going to talk about the gun show loophole. But what's happening is these gun stores are just giving them the gun now. They're not even doing the background check because there's nobody in Washington to do the check. They found a way to game the system. They found a way to get the weapons into their hands quicker. And the reason there is a 10-day background check, first of all, to give them the proper time to see, do you have mental health issues? Do you have criminal convictions? Things like that. Well, now the reason it initially came out was to avoid the spurn lover death. That's what they used to call it. And that's basically like you come home, you find out your significant other is cheating on you or is in bed with somebody else. You go out, you get a gun, and you hunt them down and you kill them. Kind of like the Republican did to those Minnesota lawmakers. Let's not forget about that. But now I will tell you a funny little story, and it's not a funny little story. I was working a couple years ago at a company, and The gun world is so bloody brilliant when it comes to guns. Bump stocks, ammunition, how to get weapons through the loopholes, through the cracks, because they don't want the government to know that they have guns. They really, if they can do it, they will do it illegally because in their mind, the government's going to come knocking on their door and take their guns. It's never happened in history, but that is the paranoia fear that resides in this culture. So I was at work and it was at 5 o'clock on a Friday. And there was a court decision that came down, I believe, out of Atlanta, and it basically stopped the sale of a certain type of ammunition at 8 o'clock on Monday morning. This was during the Biden administration. I will tell you, I worked in a crew, 10 guys. 9 of them were gun advocates, owners, whatever. They spent the rest of that night getting on their phone, alerting their friends, purchasing ammunition before the deadline on Monday morning. So they know how to exploit any loophole in the system. Now, is this going to make America safer? Sorry, no. I mean, they can't do it legally, they can't do it ethically, and they damn well can't do it morally. Because all that matters is they got to love the gun. They love the gun more than they love the country. They love the gun more than they love kids. They're part of that. That is a stain on their soul. Sorry, not sorry. All right, let's talk about the young Republicans. Funny little story that didn't seem to make it into too many news feeds. We have young Republican groups, we have young Democrat groups. They are aspiring to take their stand in the political universe. Well, it seems like the older Republican fascists have been teaching their younger brethren very, very well. Seems like Politico the other day released a story talking about chats between young Republican groups throughout the United States. This was through Telegram. And they were incredibly horrifying and disgusting on every level. Most of them were talking about how Hitler was somebody to be idolized. They also made comments like, raping is epic. Like, it's fantastic. Like, wow, I didn't know Brett Kavanaugh was in that chat, but let's move on. So we also have a Republican, let's call this young fascist out by name, Joe Maglione, and he was the former general counsel of the New York State Young Republicans, and he said in the chat, "Can we fix the showers? Gas chambers don't fit the Hitler aesthetic." Now, J.D. Vance, the President of the United States, somebody who you would think would actually be championing the non-racist, non-homophobic, non-xenophobic world. Well, sorry, John, this is the Trump administration. He, responding to this chat that was asked about, said, "I refuse to join the pearl clutching when powerful people call for violence." What the F does that mean? What? Maybe I'm just not smart enough. Can't you just say it's disgusting, it's deplorable, and that has no place in political society? That we are aspiring to be Hitler? That we need to exterminate Jews? I mean, my gosh, that is a real thing. J.D. Vance. I mean, I know that he lusts for the presidency in 2028, but at some point, how much of your soul are you going to sell? You know, the guy who's pushing the anti-immigration thing, even though his wife was an immigrant. Oh, so was Trump's. I guess it's different. My producer asks me about that frequently, and all I can say is it doesn't apply to them because they're rich, white, and powerful. You know, we just got that going on. You know, it reminds me of the classic song where they say, country song, where they say, "Mama, don't let your babies grow up to be cowboys." I think we ought to rephrase it in today's world and say, "Mama, don't let your young Republicans grow up to be fascists," because that's exactly what the hell is going on. Finally, let's talk about Scott Bessent. He is the Treasury Secretary of the United States. And I really am fascinated when these people start talking about things that are outside their purview. I don't know if you remember, but in the first 2 months, Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, frequently went to Moscow and Ukraine to try and settle that war. Now, I'm not sure. Wouldn't you think you'd want somebody from the Defense Department or the State Department doing that? Nope. Scott Bessent. He needs to get a ride on the private jet, right? Well, he went on the Charlie Kirk podcast, and how long is that going to last? Let me give you a little fun one. Will the Charlie Kirk podcast last longer, or will the Middle East peace deal? Alex, I don't know for 300. So he went on and said, Charlie's death is like a domestic 9/11. I don't know how long Scott Bessent has been of this world. I mean, coming into MAGA, maybe you have to get deprogrammed, reprogrammed. But 9/11 was a domestic incident that happened in New York in the continental United States, and 3,000 people died. To equate that to Charlie, a single individual in Utah, as being equivalent, I'm not sure what Scott's smoking, but whatever it is, start passing it around, because I really can't deal with any more of this insanity. It's just getting stupid on stupid. But that wasn't enough for good old Scott. Oh, no, 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 no. When you're in the ecosystem, you got to keep doubling down and doubling down and doubling down. So he says he was asked about the pro-Palestinian protests that have went on in the United States for basically the last 2 years during the existence of the Israeli-Hamas war. And he said, quote unquote, many of these organizations have been financed by nonprofits, and that is going to stop immediately. Okay. Maybe they are getting funded from nonprofits. But another question, Mr. Secretary, now that you're outside of your purview and you're dealing with domestic situations, not finance, what about the Oath Keepers and Proud Boys? How were they funded on January 6th? Well, they just had change in their pocket. Most reports, especially in the 9/11 or the January 6th, the House committee said that they started planning a month and a half before January 6th. It was well coordinated. It was well funded. Now, Mr. Secretary, maybe we ought to look at where the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers got their funding. Oh, we don't have to do that anymore, because they all got pardoned after they were convicted, some of them even for treason. Oh, yeah, that happened. I think seditious treason was the term. Only 4 people in the history of the United States. A couple of them were Proud Boys or Oath Keepers. I forget which one. I really don't care as I go down that rabbit hole. But maybe, Mr. Secretary, instead of worrying about protesters, peaceful protesters, you should maybe take a little more focus on people who actually launched into action. The 1,600 people who are criminally convicted, not even counting the 1,000 more that weren't convicted or charged, because there was just so many and we had no ID on them. Maybe we ought to worry about them. The ones who tried to overthrow democracy, the ones who tried to overthrow the election and the Capitol. Maybe we ought to look at them. Where did they get their funding? How come that's not an issue? And honestly, even though I'm a progressive Democrat, that Merrick Garland, that guy's a loser. That guy waited too long. And maybe he thought he was upholding the law. Maybe he thought he was doing the right thing. You know what? He should have went for the throat. He should have put those people in prison for a long effing time. It would have only been 2 or 3 years. And maybe he should have went after Donald Trump for the classified documents, but that's another story for another time. All right. If you could, hit that like and subscribe button. It means a lot to us. Also, feel free to leave a comment. Tell me how cool I am, or tell me what a nerd I am. Either one probably fits. All right. We'll see you soon on the Scorched Earth Political Podcast.